Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ghazali, teaching assistant at the Department of Anatomy, Faculty of Medicine, University of Khartoum. And I would like to welcome you all in our first session in upper limb module. Actually, this module will be divided into 5 practical sessions. The first session will be about osteology of the upper limb. In the second practical, we will study the pectoral region, muscles, including the shoulder joint and muscles of the arm. In the third practical, we will study the axilla. We will study all the content of the axilla. In the third practical, we will study the forearm, including the elbow joint. In the fifth and the final practical, we will study the hand, including the wrist joint. As you will see in the following practicals, the upper limb, just like the lower limb, is subdivided into compartments. Structures of each compartment have got the same more or less innervation, more or less blood supply, and somehow same function. Again, you have to know the origin, the insertion, and the action of each muscles and each compartment. Now, let's go to our first practical, which is osteology. Now, we would like to see the names of the bones of the upper limb in the articulated skeleton. Our first 2 bones are the clavicles. This is the right clavicle and this is the left clavicle. Okay? Our second bone will be the 2 scapulae. Okay? This is the right scapula and this is the left scapula. Okay? The 2 scapulae posterior. Okay? Again, our third bone, this is the bone of the arm, is the humerus. The humerus. Next are the bones of the forearm, the one that is medially. This is the ulna, and the one that is laterally, this is the radius. Okay, bones of the forearm are the ulna and radius. Okay. Next, this is the hands. The bones of the hand are divided into carpal bones, metacarpal bones, and phalanges. Now, we will see each one of these bones separately to identify features, and we will mention some or much of muscular attachment. Don't worry, it will now you will know the names, but in the following practicals you will see the muscles individually. Okay, don't bother, we will just mention the names, we will see them next practicals. Now let's go to our first bone, which is the clavicle. Hello again. Our first bone is the clavicle. The clavicle is a long bone that lies horizontally and very superficially in the upper chest. The clavicle has got a medial rounded end. This is the medial end, and a lateral flat end. The medial end is rounded and the lateral end is flat. It has got 2 surfaces. The superior surface, which is smooth, and an inferior surface, which is rough. Actually, the inferior surface is roughened by the attachment to a ligament. For example, in the medial surface, here it is roughened by the attachment of the costoclavicular ligament, and on the lateral aspect there is this tubercle which is called the conoid tubercle that gives attachment to the conoid ligament, and this line called the trapezoid line for the trapezoid ligament. So the inferior surface is roughened because of attachment of the ligament, medially costoclavicular ligament, and laterally those two together are called coracoclavicular ligament. In between them there is, in the inferior surface, is a groove for the subclavius muscle. So this is the groove for the subclavius muscle. All right. Now there is anterior border and a posterior border. Okay. In the anatomical position, the anterior border, the medial 2/3 is convex forward and the lateral 1/3 is concave forward. All right. In the medial border, the clavicle provide attachment for a muscle called sternocleidomastoid. So in the superior surface of the medial border, the clavicular head of sternocleidomastoid is attached here. In the lateral aspect of the clavicle, anteriorly it provides attachment for the deltoid, and posteriorly it provides an attachment for the trapezius muscle. Of course, the lateral end articulate with the scapula, and the medial end articulate with the clavicle, articulate with the sternum and with the first costal cartilage. All right. After we have seen the general features of the clavicle, now we have to identify, is it right or left? We have said all the features. You have to put the rounded end medially and the flattened end laterally, and you have to put the smooth surface superiorly, and then to figure out. So this is my right clavicle. If we look at the other set of the clavicle, so this is our next clavicle. This end is rounded while this end is flattened. So this is the medial end and this is the lateral end. This surface is smooth while this surface is rough. This is the coracoclavicular ligament and this is the costoclavicular ligament. So this is the inferior surface. So after putting the two ends, this is the medial end and this is the superior surface, this is my left clavicle, and those are the two clavicles in the anatomical position. Okay, this is my right one and this is my left one. Okay, that's all for the clavicle. Our next bone is the scapula. As you can see, the scapula is triangular in shape. It is flat bone found in the posterior aspect of the thoracic cavity of the rib cage. It has got three borders: superior border, lateral border which is thick, and a medial border which is thin. It also has got three angles. This one is the inferior angle, this one is the superior angle, and this lateral end that contains the glenoid is the lateral angle. The scapula has got two surfaces, the anterior one which is immediately behind the ribs, is the costal surface, and this one is the dorsal surface, right? Talking about superior border, it traverses from the superior angle and courses laterally somehow downward to dip in this notch, which is the scapular notch. From here, this process is called the coracoid process. So, the neck of the coracoid process immediately behind the scapular notch, right? As we said, the lateral border is thicker and the medial border is thin. This surface, which is the anterior surface, contain the subscapular notch. You can see here these ridges for the multipinnate fibers of the subscapularis muscle, which arises from the medial two-thirds of the subscapular notch, right? Posteriorly, the posterior surface is divided by this projection, which is the spine, into a supraspinous notch that contains supraspinatus muscle and an infraspinatus fossa, which contain infraspinatus muscle. If we follow the spine, we will see that it will flatten to form the acromion. Okay, this is the acromion. All right. Now, talking about this spine, the spine provides an attachment for two muscles. Here is the trapezius muscle, and posteriorly and in the outer wall for the deltoid muscles. All right. This area of the scapula is called the glenoid cavity. This is the glenoid cavity. Here, upward, this area is called the supraglenoid tubercle, which provide an attachment for the long head of the biceps. And here, this area is called the infraglenoid tubercle, that will provide an attachment for the long head of the triceps muscle, right? Regarding other muscular attachment, the anterior surface in the medial border will provide an attachment for serratus anterior muscle, while in the medial surface, again but posteriorly, will provide an attachment for three muscles. In the space above the spine, it will provide an attachment for levator scapulae muscle, and in the area adjacent to the spine, it will provide an attachment for rhomboid minor, and below this will provide an attachment for rhomboid major. The lateral surface will provide an attachment for three muscles. From downward, here at the inferior angle will provide an attachment for a muscle called teres major. Upward, this area will provide an attachment for a muscle called teres minor. There is a small groove here, if you can see it. An artery transects the teres minor origin. This is circumflex scapular artery. Okay. As we said, this is the scapular notch through which passes the suprascapular nerve and vessel. From here, this process project forward, which is the coracoid process. The coracoid process provide an attachment for 3 muscles: pectoralis minor, coracobrachialis, and the short head of biceps. That's all for the scapula and its muscular attachment. Now our last point is to localize the scapula. Is it right or left? In order to say this is a right or left scapula, you have to have reference points. You have to understand that in the anatomical position, the surface with one continuous fossa is anteriorly, while the surface with the spine and the 2 fossae is posteriorly. So in the anatomical position, this is the anterior, and you have to know that this is called the inferior angle. That means it should be inferiorly, and the glenoid should be superiorly. So this is the anatomical position. Now the glenoid cavity also should face laterally. So this is my right scapula. Applying the same principles, this is the anterior surface, while this is the posterior surface with the spine. This is inferiorly, and the glenoid is superiorly and laterally. So those are my 2 scapulae. This is the right scapula, while this is the left scapula. Thank you. Our next bone is the humerus. The humerus is the bone of the arm region. It articulates superiorly at the shoulder joint and articulate inferiorly at the elbow joint. The humerus composed of many parts. We will mention them and then see the details of each part. This area is the head of the humerus. Those are the 2 tubercles, the lesser tubercle and the greater tubercle. In between the head of the humerus and the tubercles, there is the anatomical neck of the humerus. Our next region is the shaft of the humerus. Between the shaft of the humerus and the tubercle is the surgical neck of the humerus. The shaft ends into medial and lateral epicondyles. Those are the medial and lateral epicondyles. The area immediately superior to the epicondyles are called the supracondylar ridges. So here this is the medial supracondylar ridge, and this is the lateral supracondylar ridge. The articular surfaces inferiorly are the medial one is the trochlea, and the lateral one is the capitulum. Okay. All right. Those are the main features of the humerus. Regarding the head of the humerus, it is 1/3 of a circle. It is smooth for articulation with its fellow scapula. The head of the humerus articulate in its antero-inferior surface. This area will provide a wider range of movement for the head of the humerus. Okay. As we said, the part that separates the head of the humerus from the tubercles is the anatomical neck. The tubercle that is immediately anteriorly, this is the small tubercle. The small tubercle tapers into this medial lip of the bicipital groove, while the posterior tubercle tapers into the lateral lip of the bicipital groove. Between them is the bicipital groove or intertubercular sulcus. All right. Now, the lesser tubercle, this one, which is the anterior one in the anatomical position, will provide an attachment for a muscle called subscapularis, while the medial lip of the bicipital groove will provide attachment for teres major muscle. The greater tubercle, which lies somehow posteriorly in the anatomical position, this is the greater tubercle. The greater tubercle will provide an attachment for three muscles from above downward here. Yeah. Here, a muscle called supraspinatus, followed by a muscle called infraspinatus and teres minor muscles. So, the greater tubercle provide attachment for supraspinatus muscle, infraspinatus muscle and teres minor. In the bicipital groove runs the tendon of the long head of the biceps, and inferiorly it provides an attachment for a muscle called latissimus dorsi. Latissimus dorsi. Okay. So, this is the area of the two tuberosities and the intertubercular sulcus. Okay. Regarding the shaft, we have got one prominent feature which is found in the lateral aspect of the shaft. As you can see here, it is called the deltoid tuberosity. The deltoid tuberosity provides an attachment for the multipinnate fibers of the deltoid muscles. Okay. In the posterior aspect of the shaft, as you can see here, this line found immediately inferior to the deltoid tubercle, it is called the radial groove or the spiral groove. Okay. The spiral groove, this is the spiral groove. The spiral groove passes posteriorly and downward till it reaches the lateral supracondylar ridge, and as we said, two important structures pass in this groove, which are the radial nerve and the profunda brachii vessel, arteries and vein. Okay. Also, by this spiral groove, we can determine the attachment of the triceps muscle. Superiorly and laterally, the lateral head of the triceps muscle takes origin, while all the area below the radial groove is for the origin of the medial head of the triceps muscle. Okay. All right. Regarding the lower surface of the humerus, as we say, this one is the medial epicondyle, and as you can see, it protrudes more than the left. So, this is the medial epicondyle and this is the lateral epicondyle. The medial epicondyle provide muscular attachment for the flexors compartment, while the lateral epicondyle provide an attachment for the extensors compartment. Okay. Again, the medial articular surface inferiorly, this one is the trochlea, while the lateral one is the capitulum. The fossa immediately above the trochlea is the coronoid fossa. Here the coronoid process of the ulna articulate, and the fossa above the capitulum, it is called the fossa of the radial head. Okay, the trochlea articulate with the ulna, while the capitulum articulate with the radius. Okay, posteriorly there is one fossa, it is called the olecranon fossa, inside which the olecranon process of the ulna is lodged in full extension. Okay, so in the inferior aspect of the humerus, we have got medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle, trochlea medially, and the capitulum laterally, coronoid fossa above the trochlea, and fossa of the radial head, while the coronoid fossa lies posteriorly. As you can see, from posteriorly you can only identify the trochlea. The capitulum is not visual. Okay, now as we have seen all structures of the humerus, now we have to identify, is it right or left? Again, in identification you have got to have a superior landmark. In this case it is the radial head. The head should be superiorly. You should also have any identifying markers that tells you is it the anterior surface or the posterior surface. As you can see, in the anterior surface there is two fossa, while in the posterior surface there is one fossa. Okay, so this is the anterior surface and this is the superior surface. You should also know that the head is directed medially, so this is my left humerus. Okay, the head is superiorly and directed medially, and the surface with the two fossa is anteriorly. So this is my left humerus. Okay, now let's try to identify this bone. Again, it is humerus, the head is superiorly, and the trochlea and the capitulum are anteriorly. So this is the anterior surface. So, and the head of the humerus should be directed medially. So this is my right humerus. Okay. That's all for the humerus. Now let's go for our next bone. Our next bone is the radius. The radius is one of the two bones that is found in our forearm. Actually, it is the lateral one of the two. The radius has got a superior head that is cylindrical in shape. There is a neck below the head. There is tuberosity called radial tuberosity. It has got a shaft and an expanded lower end. The expanded lower end has got laterally styloid process. This is the lowermost part of the radial. Okay, and it has got in its medial side a notch for articulation with the ulna. So it is called the ulnar notch of the radius for the distal radio-ulnar joint. Okay. Now let's go again. As we said, it starts somehow small in the superior surface. This circular and pivot for articulation with the capitulum of the humerus. This is the head of the radius. The head of the radius, as we said, articulate in the elbow joint with the humerus at the capitulum, followed by the neck of the humerus, and anteriorly we find the radial tuberosity. The radial tuberosity provide an attachment for the biceps tendon, for the tendon of the biceps. Immediately from the radial tuberosity, there are two oblique lines, anterior oblique line and posterior oblique line. Here, this is the tuberosity, and those are the two lines. This area provide an attachment for supinator, and further downward and laterally, this area provide an attachment for pronator teres muscle. This surface, the medial surface of the radius, is for the interosseous membrane that connects the radius with the ulna. Okay. Regarding the inferior surface, as we said, it expands downward, and in the articular surfaces it articulates with the carpal bones, specifically the scaphoid and the lunate. As we said, this process is called the styloid process of the radius. It lies laterally, and it provides an attachment for brachioradialis muscle and the extensor retinaculum. Okay. Posteriorly, in the lower end, there is this tubercle. It's a characteristic feature in the posterior surface of the radius. It is called the dorsal tubercle or the Lister tubercle. Immediately behind it, there are two grooves for passage of tendons. When we study the forearm, you have to know which tendon passes here and which tendon passes medially and which tendon passes laterally. Okay. All right. Regarding the localization of the radius, is it right or left? Again, our superior landmark is the head, because it's very characteristic, cylindrical. This should be superiorly, and you have to have got an anterior or a posterior landmark. For me, the Lister tubercle is very characteristic, so the Lister tubercle should be posteriorly and the head superiorly. The direction of the styloid process tells you is it right or left. So this one is right, and this is my right radius. Okay. Again, for the other one, the head is superiorly. Posteriorly, we have got the Lister tubercle, so I put it posteriorly, and anteriorly we have got the radial tuberosity. So this is the head, this is the radial tuberosity anteriorly, and the direction of the styloid process in this one is in the left side. So this is my left humerus, my left radius. Okay. Okay, that's all for the radius. Now let's go to our next bone. Our next bone in our practical is the ulna. Again, the ulna is one of the two bones that occupies the forearm region. In fact, it is the one that is located medially in the forearm. In reverse to the radius, the ulna, as you can see here, start somehow big in the superior portion and tapers distally into a small head. So the superior part is large, while the inferior end is small. The superior part is formed in two processes. The posterior one is the olecranon process, while the anterior one is the coronoid process. In between them, as you can see here, there is this fossa. It's called the trochlear fossa. The trochlea of the humerus occupy the trochlear fossa, while the olecranon process and the coronoid process each dips in its corresponding fossa in the humerus. Okay. Again, the coronoid process provide an important attachment for the triceps muscles. The tendon of the triceps attached in the olecranon process, while the coronoid process provide an attachment for brachialis muscle. The lateral part of the fossa, here you can see a tubercle called sublim tubercle. The sublim tubercle, in the medial side. In the medial side, there is this sublim tubercle. The sublim tubercle provide an attachment for muscle called flexor digitorum superficialis, and inferior to it, the deep surface of the deep head of the pronator teres. Okay, all right. Laterally, here you can see a notch. This notch is for articulation with the head of the radius, so we call it the radial notch of the ulna. The radial notch of the ulna is for the proximal radio-ulnar joint. So the head of the radius articulate with the ulna at the proximal radio-ulnar joint in this area, which is called the radial head of the ulna. Okay. You can see here this border is called the interosseous border. Again, there is the interosseous membrane that connect the radius with the ulna and separates this surface, which is the flexor surface, while this small surface is the extensor surface posteriorly. Okay. Downward, there is rounded head of the ulna articulate with the radius in the distal radio-ulnar joint, and there is an ulnar styloid process that is form the medial and project medially. Okay, this is the styloid process of the ulna, and this is the ulnar head. Okay. Okay. That's all for the ulna. Now let's go to our localization of the ulna. Okay. In order to localize the ulna, again you have to have a superior landmark, which is the trochlear notch with the coronoid and olecranon the coronoid. This portion should be superiorly. Okay, and the notch itself should be pointed anteriorly. Okay, so the notch is anteriorly, this whole portion is superiorly, the radial notch should direct you laterally. Okay, should be directed laterally. So this is my okay. This is my right ulna. This is my right ulna. This portion is superiorly and the trochlear notch is anteriorly. and the radial notch is laterally. So this is my right ulna. To demonstrate the left one, we have got this one. Again, the portion with the two processes is superiorly, and the trochlear notch itself faces anteriorly, and the radial notch should be directed laterally. So, okay, this is also a right one. So we do not have a left ulna. Okay, that's all for the ulna. Thank you. Let's go to our next bone. Okay, now we would like together to see the bones of the forearm together and articulated. As you can see, this is my right forearm. Okay, this is the ulna medially, and this is the radius laterally. Okay, and we have got here the proximal radioulnar joint, the joint between the radius head and the radial notch of the ulna, and there is distal radioulnar joint between the ulnar head and the ulnar notch of the radius. Okay. Now we can see what range of movement happens in this movement. It is called pronation, and this is supination. Pronation, supination. Okay, never mind, we will see more in the next practicals. Okay. Now let's talk about the osteology of the hand. This is the most distal part in the upper limb. As you can see, this is my left hand. All right. Osteology of the hand can be divided into this area that is called the carpal bones. They are 8 in numbers, the carpal bones. Then the metacarpal bones, they are 5 in numbers. And then the phalanges, they are 14 in number. 3 phalanges for each finger, except for the first one, the thumb. It has got 2 phalanges. Okay. Again, carpal bones, metacarpal bones, and the phalanges. Okay. Regarding the carpal bones, they are found in 2 rows. This one is the proximal row, and it is composed of 4 bones, while this one is the distal row, and it is composed of 4 bones. Regarding orientation of the bones from lateral to medial, in the proximal row, we will start by scaphoid bone, lunate bone, triquetral bone, and pisiform. Again, the proximal row of the carpal bones: scaphoid, lunate, triquetral, and pisiform. The distal row, again from lateral to medial: trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Okay. Few words about the carpal bones. The first one in the proximal row is the scaphoid. Scaphoid bone is one of the 2 bones that articulate in the wrist joint, the scaphoid and the lunate. As you can see, it articulates medially with the lunate and distally with the trapezium and the trapezoid, and partially with the capitate. The scaphoid is the most commonly fractured bone of the carpal bones, and when it gets fractured, it's prone to a vascular necrosis if the fractured area is in the waist. Okay. The next bone is the lunate bone. The lunate bone is the bone that most commonly dislocate, and it dislocates anteriorly. Okay. Regarding this bone is the capitate, which is the biggest of the carpal bones. This bone, the most medial one of the distal row, is the hamate, and as you can see, there is this hook of the hamate. Okay. Okay. This is hook of the hamate. The ulnar, the deep branch of the ulnar nerve is related to this hook of the hamate. Okay. All right. So those are the carpal bones. The bones, the sets of bones above it, is called the metacarpal bones. Regarding naming them, this is the first metacarpal, second metacarpal, third, fourth, and the fifth metacarpal bones. Okay. The first metacarpal articulate with the trapezium, the second articulate with the trapezoid, the third articulate with the capitate, the fifth articulate with the hamate, and the fourth articulate with both the capitate and the hamate bone. Okay. Each one of the metacarpal bones composed of a base, shaft, and heads. The heads articulate with the phalanx at the metacarpopharyngeal joints, and the heads of the metacarpal bones forms the knuckles of the fist. Those are the heads of the metacarpal bones. Again, we forgot to mention the joints between the proximal and the distal row of the carpal bones is called the midcarpal joints, and the joint between one of the carpal bones and the other is called intercarpal joints, while this joint is called carbo-metacarpal joint. This is carbo-metacarpal joint. Okay. Carbo-metacarpal joint. Okay. Regarding the phalanges, again, as we said, they are 14 in number. It's composed of the proximal phalanx, in this one, proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and the distal phalanx. Okay, except for the thumb, it has got only 2 phalanges, proximal and distal, no intermediate. So the total phalanges number is 14. The phalanges are separated by proximal interphalangeal joint and distal interphalangeal joint. The proximal interphalangeal joint between the proximal phalanges and the intermediate, and the distal interphalangeal joint between the intermediate and the distal phalanges. Okay. Again, the phalanges are composed of a base and a head. Again, base and a head. Okay. This is the anterior surface of the hand. Again, this is the posterior surface of the hand. Same bones, same features. By this, we came to the end of our osteology. Again, don't worry, we have said a lot of information, a lot of muscles that you don't know yet, but don't worry, we will see each of the before mentioned muscles in its corresponding practical. Okay, thank you.